Experts say from as early as 3, children begin asking parents about their sexuality. By ages 5 to 7, they are more curious about what it means to be male or female and if traditional gender norms apply to them. So let's discuss this with clinical social worker and sexologist Ron Adenel from the University of Cape Town, Akani Shimangi, the director of Matimba, a support group for transgender children, and Philip Rosenthal from the Christian View Network. A very warm welcome to all three of you. Akani, let me start off with you. You are transgender, queer, that's how you identify yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story.
I'm not sure which part of my story I'm supposed to be telling. I'd also like to correct that you named trans as a sexual orientation. It's not, as a gender identity, and these are two very different things. But I'm the director of Matimba, an organization that works specifically with trans youth in South Africa. I'm non-binary, my pronouns are they and them. Yeah.
All right, and I mean, this is something that we are increasingly hearing, the sexuality debates going on with children from a much younger age. Is this something that has always, and this might seem like a simple question, is this always something that's been there, or are we just more aware of it, these sort of issues, these debates going on in children's minds about their sexuality?
So I think it's very weird that we're even debating people's humanity, right? But once again, I'll correct you again. It is not a sexual orientation. So this is not a conversation about sexuality. It's a conversation about gender identity. And naming it sexuality kind of makes it juicier for people to have that conversation, because we're talking about kids and sexuality. I don't think at 3 anyone has a sexuality, whether they're straight or gay, right? But we're talking about gender identity, and this is something you grow into. It's like the question of when you found out you're a woman or someone finds out they're a man. This is something we grow into and not something we are just born and we fully understand. And gender roles and gender identity is very specific to culture and time. And I think we're hearing more about it because people are feeling more free to actually express themselves. And perfect example, our constitution has changed, so it allows trans people to fully express themselves and not be stigmatized and discriminated against. And people did not express this as much a few years ago because of the fear of discrimination and stigma, not because trans people did not exist.
Okay, that's why we are having this conversation today. It's important that we get the language right, that we understand what is happening. I mean, when I was growing up, for example, bisexuality was the big word. You know, that was what was happening. And so much has changed, Ron. And I'm just wondering what it is that we're seeing at the moment, and from the sort of work you do, about how children are addressing these gender identity issues.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and good morning to your listeners. Just to kind of tag on to Akani, just to emphasize, so what we know, and being transgender or gender diverse, being on the spectrum, is not new. The research and the studies have already been done. There's been many anthropological studies. People of diverse transgender persons and gender diverse persons have existed through time, and there's enough historical information to back that up. And even in many cultures and societies through the centuries, transgender and gender diverse members of society have actually been revered and often had quite, powerful positions within their community. So this is not new. What is new is the level of knowledge and understanding we have today, and also the fact that there's access to information through programs like this and social media. So with regards to children, so I've been working in the field of transgender affirming healthcare for almost 20 years now. So my position comes from, an academic position, a scientific position, and a professional position. And I have navigated with over 250 transgender and gender diverse clients, and a significant number of them being children and adolescents. And what we know is, we already know that sexual orientation, which is not what we're talking about, exists on a spectrum. And up until 1972, it was a pathology until all the research was done. And in 1973, sexual orientation as a spectrum was declared just to be a normal part of the human spectrum. We basically already achieved the position with regards to gender identity in 2013, where up until 2013, people that were of different, or transgender were deemed to have a pathology. All the science and research has been done, and essentially from about 2013, internationally, it's been acknowledged that gender identity or being transgender and gender diverse is a spectrum, and it naturally occurs. The issue with children is obviously always controversial. But what we do know is that whatever a person's innate gender identity is going to be, whatever that is essentially established by the time the child is born. Gender identity is a spectrum, just like biological sex is a spectrum as well. You get intersex persons. So children as young as the age of 2 and 3, when they're navigating their context and they were assigned a certain gender at birth, but the way they innately, naturally experience themselves to be and what they see mirrored in their environment. For a certain proportion of young children, what is mirrored in genders other than what they were assigned is what seems more natural and innate for them. And these would then be the children that will, in more overt ways, start to express and articulate in different ways, that how they experience themselves and how their family or parents or, telling them they are is not matching. I can, back this up with so many of my trans adults I've worked with through the years. When I do their histories, more than 90% of my trans adults will tell me already at the age 2 or 3, I knew there was something about me that was different. That how the world was seeing me and how I experienced myself did not match up.
Philip, let me draw you in here. I mean, what is your standpoint here with the sort of the Christian background? I mean, to pick up on what Ron said, in the 1950s, many psychologists saw homosexuality as a mental illness. We've seen problems in the church dealing with same-sex marriages, for example. So how is this conversation being had?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of things that have been stated already that I need to correct rather rapidly. The first is the suggestion that this is something that is normal, and particularly for children, as established by age 3. If one looks at the literature, one sees that 4 out of 5 children who have gender dysphoria, the problem resolves by the time of puberty, and they don't have that any problem anymore. If you start taking hormone blockers and having surgery before that, you're actually causing permanent and irreversible harm to that child's body. We have hundreds of people who have regretted this transgender surgery and hormone treatment, which is irreversible, and we could later have somebody maybe being interviewed with that situation. One also has the situation that even Sweden, which is the country which is the most accepting of this behavior, the long-term follow-up has showed that the results are very negative for mental health and for suicide risk. Further than that, the paper that was published that has been widely relied on the American Journal of Psychiatry, promoting that this is an improvement to mental health through changing people with surgery, has actually now been retracted. They found the statistics were false. And so I would correct all of this. I would also just point out that a psychiatrist from UCT testified the opposite of what has just been said, and that psychiatrist now has a complaint against him as being persecuted, being investigated by the institution, which is a standard tactic of these gender activists to suppress alternative views. Many people voluntarily want help with gender dysphoria, which I agree is different to homosexuality, but can be treated, and many people have been successfully treated. But what is being proposed here gives these people absolutely no hope. It's also an entirely false idea that it is actually scientifically possible to change gender. One has just in the area, for example, of muscle, 3,000 different genes which are different between male and females just for skeletal muscle, and that has a different result in sport, which is why men do a whole lot better in sport than women, and the results are very different, and that is why one doesn't allow men and women to compete against each other, but these radical gender ideology is trying to force this into the schools, and thus putting girls at risk and making it difficult for them to compete. We also have this, what I view as a very dangerous idea, even more so this whole idea of a spectrum, and the concept of fluidity that is being introduced then means that there is uncertainty about whether these people are actually male or female, and we have incidents where children have been and women have been groped in public toilets, in school toilets, because men have been allowed into women's bathrooms. And so we would totally oppose this practice. Don't believe that this is possible. I think this is an ideological construct, and I would say we need to stop the experimentation on children.
Connie, what's your response?
So, firstly, Philip has basically said intersex people don't exist, right? So he has said there's no fluidity within sex, which is very scary. You have erased as many people as there are twins in the world. That's how many intersex people there are in the world. But secondly, no one has ever operated on children. Children go on hormone blockers at 16 if their gender dysphoria has subsided, as he wants to claim that that is possible. They go off hormone blockers. They go through the puberty they would have gone through, and they continue their lives as the gender identity that they are, right? I'm very touched by the fact that ENCA would even make this a debate. We're debating people's humanity. That is so scary for me, right? But also we're debating based on Christianity, which is based on the Bible, which says slavery is okay. It's a very iffy line here, right? I think trans people are people who are saying, you know what, respect me and allow me to do what I want to do. And he can't even give stats of the number of people who have detransitioned, as he has wanted to call it, and he said, we can bring you one person. I have worked in the field for over 10 years. I don't know one person, and I possibly know more trans people than anyone else in this conversation. So it's a fear. It's interesting how his advocacy comes from fear, how he must say that women are being groped in the bathrooms, it is sad that you're literally willing to cause fear for people to choose, right, to go on hormones. And the choice to go on hormones is not the choice of gender identity. Right? There are people whose gender identity and their dysphoria does not require them to go on hormones. There's a lot of people who will never go on hormones because it is expensive. There's a lot of people who will never have surgery. Children are not operated on. You have to be over 16 for you to be operated on. Your parents have to agree. You have to have gone through therapy. But using his Christianity and I'm going to call it his Christianity. I come from a Christian family, and none of them have ever sat in front of me and said, you know what, God has not. The same way that...
Connie, sorry, let me jump in here, Ron. I should imagine that if anyone, whatever age, comes to terms with what you are, I mean, that can only be a beautiful thing. I should imagine that the positive impact on you is extraordinary on you, your family, and those close to you. But when you hear words like that, like those people and radical ideology and people with problems, I mean, what sort of impact does that have?
It has a huge, and as a mental health practitioner and someone that works in the psychosocial arena, there's one part of me that just gets so exhausted with this debate. It's such an old, fundamentalist, and I hear the term ideology being used, and if ever there was an ideology, it is what Philip is articulating. I respect people's rights to their own particular religious viewpoints. Live your life according to your religious viewpoints. My great concern, and I've worked with families and children, trans children and adolescents through many years, to get to live your true, authentic self, which brings it down to the point of people's dignity, is an important and a powerful, quality of life issue. We should all have the right to live dignified lives, and part of living a dignified life is being able to live your true, authentic self in the world.
Ron, I'm going to have to stop you there. I just want to give Philip just a right to reply there. You've got about 30 seconds, Philip. What is it that you'd like to see?
Okay, firstly, look, I would confirm the Bible says that God created men male and female. There are 1 in 10,000 people who have an ambiguity due to a genetic problem, but what is this ideology is attempting to do is to mainstream this and taking people who have gender dysphoria, instead of helping them, to encourage them to make permanent physical changes which are irreversible, and then to try and force everybody else in society to refer to them by their chosen gender pronouns, such as calling Fred, Sally, even if they don't want to. Certainly I would not be prepared to do that, but these people then want to sue if you're not prepared to agree to that, or if you're not prepared to let them into your daughter's public bathrooms, which I would not tolerate at a school. And I just want to confirm that in terms of rights, school governing bodies have the right to oppose these proposals, and we need to stand firm with it.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. I mean, what a fascinating conversation, and clearly a lot more time needs to be spent on this. Philip Akani, Ron, thank you very much.